the grand entrance. All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the final part of Stranded in Asia. In case you haven't been with us for the other presentations, my name is Erin O'Neil. I'm an Upper Arlington native, so I'm happy to be presenting here at my home library from childhood. So this is a series about my time living in Asia last year for 6 months. Soon I will be saying 2 years ago, which is super weird to me. This part of the lecture series is about the international adventures that I took. So the long story short of it is I moved over to Asia after graduation for a job. The job didn't end up working out, unfortunately, and so I decided to quit and make my own path. So I headed out to Western China, which was the last presentation last month. And then I decided that, well, why stop at China? Why not hit all of the countries in Southeast Asia that I've been wanting to visit for a while now? So I packed a backpack and I set out for Southeast Asia. So this is a little bit about the adventures that I had while I was traveling around alone for about 5 weeks. So first, a little bit of information for you. These are some of the apps that came in handy while I was booking my trip. So Google, your best friend for just about everything. You did need a VPN to be able to access Google, but it was really my go-to question answer. I used Hostelworld and what is now Trip.com, used to be C-Trip, in order to book all of my hostels, train tickets, plane tickets, and then EasyBook I used for Malaysian trains. So some key sites that I used to kind of help plan the trip. First up was Malaysia. I went to Penang and Kuala Lumpur. So the flight from Shanghai to Penang was about $113 with one stop along the way. This was the hostel that I stayed in. It's called the Magpie Residence. It was really homey. My mom likes to reference these as like coffin bunks, but they were actually quite cozy. So the hostel had a little bathroom, it had a kitchenette so that you could bring leftover food or cook if you really wanted to. It had a nice shower facility, and it was really kind of cozy and homey. So it had a nice living room area. It even had a washing machine. They would do your laundry for you if you wanted them to. And then it was just kind of a row of quote-unquote coffins. But like I said, it was very cozy, very cool at night, and just kind of very private and secluded. So they've got a little fan up there too. And then they had huge storage lockers that you can fit a person inside of, although I'm only 5'4", so I might have that to my advantage. And then they had a nice little outdoor patio area where you can hang your clothes to dry and shower off. So naturally, the first thing I do when I land in Malaysia is I throw my stuff in my storage locker and I try to find a beach. Batu Ferringhi was where I ended up. Beautiful beach environment, a lot of coastside restaurants and seafood places, and just kind of a nice, serene place to go and watch the sunset. So I ended up hanging out there for a majority of the day, and I have quite a comical story about ending up there without a bathing suit, in my Converse tennis shoes, just kind of sitting on a blanket that I managed to stick in my bag because I wasn't exactly prepared for finding a beach, but thought it sounded nice and went anyways. And while I was sitting on that beach, I saw a sign for water sports, and then I watched as some people went back and forth on parasails behind a boat, and I thought, well, that looks really fun, but it also sounds like a total tourist trap. I'm sure it costs $30 to do that. So I walk over to the sandwich board where they have all the prices advertised, and I start talking to a guy about parasailing, and I'm like, I don't know, it's a little pricey. And so in Southeast Asia, you got to do a lot of bargaining. And so I managed to bargain him down to about a quarter of the price that they had on the sign, because I was like, look, dude, I've been in Asia for a while. I know that price isn't true. So they gave me a discounted price, and I decided to go parasailing. was all but graceful. We won't watch that part. On this parasailing trip, I met Zaman, and I have a very entertaining story about him, but I don't quite have the time for all of it. So I will be telling it on Saturday at another event that I have flyers for back there. But Zaman invited me to go to Monkey Beach with him. So we actually kind of became pals. And he invited me to, what I thought was going to be a quick car trip out to the national park, where we were going to hike to Monkey Beach, come back, and then I'd go back to Batu Ferringhi. And this made me a little bit nervous because I was trusting a stranger who spoke very little English. And so I said yes, and then it ended up looking a little bit more like this. Also on a motorbike. Yeah. Well, there's a motorbike. So I ended up on the back of a motorbike, and I was like, oh my god, my parents are going to kill me. But he ended up taking me all over the island of Penang and to secret waterfalls and to try durian at the durian farms. And this guy, he took me all over the place as my own little personal tour guide, and I even ended up driving his motorbike. So for videos of that, you can go to onmylist.org. It's very entertaining. And we actually ended up hiking all the way to Muka Head Lighthouse, and this was the view of Muka Head. So over here is Batu Ferringhi, where I was parasailing. The hike was treacherous. I wouldn't recommend it if you're not well hydrated and or used to muggy heat, but it was phenomenal view at the top of this lighthouse. While I was in Penang, I also checked out the Georgetown street art with a friend that I met in the hostel named Mike. He's actually from Columbus, Ohio originally, which was a really cool connection, meeting all the way in Malaysia. So he and I spent a day checking out some of the Georgetown street art, which they're known for around there. So you can actually get maps that have all of the artists and the art kind of marked out, but we just kind of picked a few places that we wanted to get to and then roamed around the rest of the time, and we found some pretty cool stuff. We also decided to go to the Upside Down Museum, which I put in here purely for your entertainment because it's just a lot of fun. Walking through this house was pretty interesting because everything was upside down, but the pictures that came out were pretty cool. So Mike and I had some classic tourist fun. So the top three things in my heart, and I mean, I could go on and on and on about every single location in this presentation, but for lack of time, I'll just give you my top three. So the Batu Ferringhi beach, just the entire strip is beautiful. There's a lot to do over there and some really cool people to meet. Georgetown street art is a must-see. I am so glad we spent a super sweaty day walking around that area. And then the Muka Head Lighthouse, which, I mean, I don't think really anybody else knew about when we were there. We were the only ones hiking up and down that trail, so it was kind of cool to have a little bit more of a remote area to kind of call our own. So then I took a train from Penang to Kuala Lumpur for $15. And I really went here to hang out with my friend Jenny, who was working in Kuala Lumpur at the time. And we stayed in this apartment complex, and this was the view from the infinity pool. Anyone want to take a guess as to how much this cost us a night? You know the answer. More than $10? More than 20? 18. Right. There we go. $18 a night for an Airbnb. So all of those super cool pictures that you see of people posting from all over the world where they've got these fancy shots and things like that, it can be pretty cheap, guys. You just got to know where to look. So I was super pumped to have this kind of view of the city, and the National Mosque is actually right there. It's right there. So we had the National Mosque right there, so in the morning we could actually hear the call to prayer, and it was really cool because it echoed off of all of the buildings down below. So I've got a pretty good soundbite of that too. I think that's like a butterfly garden. So we had a great view of the city. So I kind of hopped around Kuala Lumpur for a while. I went to see the Petronas Towers. I went to the National Mosque. We had a night out at the Tapak Urban Street Dining, which is a bunch of street, food trucks. There we go, food trucks. And then obviously went to Batu Caves and hung out with some monkeys, which was really fun. Side note, up until Malaysia, I hadn't yet had Burger King. It took me all the way to get to Malaysia before I actually tried Burger King, so not sure if I'm actually American. So the couple things that I would recommend in Kuala Lumpur specifically would be the National Mosque. It was really cool to talk to some people there and kind of hear their stories and their personal relationship with Islam. And then the Batu Caves was a really cool experience. Again, quite a hike. The Petronas Towers and then the urban street dining is kind of a great all-in-one adventure. Then I headed to Singapore. I took a night train from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore for the same price that cost me that gorgeous view in Kuala Lumpur. But this one was a little bit more interesting. My train ticket said superior class, so I was picturing a first class cabin, and I walked in and a cockroach darted across the floor, and this was my lovely bathroom accommodation. So it wasn't quite what I expected, but it was a very interesting experience. I have a whole blog post about it. My feet did not touch the floor unless I had to get up to pee because there were too many little critters running around there. Looked much better in the daylight. I went to Singapore to visit Augustine, who was a coworker back in Shanghai. So when I told her that I was going to start traveling and that I really wanted to come to Singapore, she said, well, why don't you stay with me and we can hang out and spend some time together. And I thought, well, that's probably a good idea because I wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it because Singapore is very expensive. So she graciously hosted me, her entire family hosted me in their house and took me to dinner and kind of showed me around Singapore, which is a very cool place to be, which we mostly just ate food. We've got waffles, we've got roti prata, which is, by the way, basically fried bread with curry and sugar. We've got toast, coconut ice cream. That's a velvet waffle with, I think, custard on top. I joke about the dumplings making me fat, but it was really just Singapore. I spent an afternoon in Pulau Ubin, which is an island off the coast of Singapore. So you take a ferry to the island where you can walk around, you can rent bikes. So I rented this wonderful bike right there and just kind of rode around on the pathways and kind of got lost in the islands, and it was really cool. Very muggy still, but very cool. Very quiet and serene, and got to kind of find some places where you could overlook the quarry, and certainly a good day trip. And then, of course, I spent some time in the city. I went to the Gardens by the Bay. I saw the light show called Spectra, which they do have one of the best light shows, I would say, in the world, at least as far as I've seen. And then, of course, this beautiful hotel, which I can only wish to get to the top of someday because that thing's expensive. So I would definitely recommend Pulau Ubin. I would recommend the light show in Gardens by the Bay, but guys, just go to Singapore and eat food. It's amazing. Then I went on to Labuan Bajo. So I actually flew through Bali. The flight was about $142. Which, by the way, I had been pronouncing it as Labuan Bajo because I spoke Spanish growing up. Come to find that I was pronouncing it entirely wrong, and it's a hard J, so it's Labuan Bajo. I embarrassed myself too frequently before I got to the realization of that. I stayed in Chow Hostel, which this is all open air. So this is one of the bunks on the top floor where they have mosquito netting, and you can just fall asleep watching the sunset and wake up to the sunrise. It's very stunning. This is where I met Laura, who currently lives in Indonesia and had spent a lot of time working in the local dive shops. She's very passionate about beach cleanups. She'll travel all over the place and collect plastic bottles, and she's an advocate for environmentally friendly sunscreens, shampoos, makeup products, and very keen on protecting the wildlife. So she educated me a lot about the types of products that I was using and just kind of making me more aware of the fact of how much plastic we use and how that ends up in our oceans. So Laura was a very fascinating person. There is a chapter dedicated to her in the book that I'm writing, as with everyone that you'll see in this presentation. And so she decided that we were going to go on an adventure together. So she proposed that we go out to Rangko Cave, which you can take a boat from Labuan Bajo to Rangko Cave, but we decided to do it the hard way and took an hour-and-a-half motorbike ride up through the island, which, by the way, this motorbike cost us $5 a day, and it came with a water bottle full of gasoline. So we packed a lunch and we headed off, and this is a little bit about what the road looks like. It was not fun. Looking back on it now, it was a super cool adventure, but that bumpy ride and the amount of water that had condensed itself into the road, it was honestly pretty dangerous, but we wore helmets. So we rode into this little village where we met a guide and paid for a ticket to take us to Rango Cave. There were some pretty cute baby goats running around. I forgot to put them in there, I'm sorry. So we took that boat to this cave. But this, guys, how cool is that? This is still one of my most liked Instagram pictures. It was the coolest experience I think I've ever had in swimming in general. So Rango Cave was definitely a must go to. And then I decided that I just hadn't had enough of the water. So even though I had been feeling under the weather and I kind of was dealing with some congestion, I thought, well, I can't really go diving because the air pressure would probably make my head explode, and I'm not licensed and I don't really want to pay for it. So I decided that I was going to go snorkeling instead, which was equally as phenomenal. So I decided to join a day tour where they took us out and we snorkeled in a couple different locations with the manta rays, and then we went to Komodo Island, which is where all those giant Komodo dragons live. So this is a little bit from that. So I didn't have an underwater camera. I just had my GoPro, that little thing over there, and I didn't have an underwater case because I wasn't prepared to go snorkeling. So I just wrapped it in a plastic baggie and put a hair tie around the lens. It worked out pretty well. So being creative in situations comes in handy. I would definitely recommend Rango Cave, even if you take a boat from Labuan Bajo and you don't risk your life with a $5 motorbike in the middle of nowhere. It's definitely a worthwhile trip. Also Komodo Island, even though when we got there, the tour guide was like, okay, he was going through some of the safety procedures, and then he brought out this stick that he was holding, and he went, "This will protect us." And I thought, oh, cool. They're gonna protect us with a giant stick, sweet. And then obviously take a chance and snorkel or dive if you can. It's one of the top places in the world to go diving. So I was a little sad that I didn't have the certification to actually go that deep, but it was still a really cool experience to swim with manta rays. And then I headed to Taipei. This was one of the most treacherous journeys of my life because I decided I was going to go cheap instead of efficient. So for $331, I flew from Labuan Bajo to Jakarta to Singapore to Taipei. In Singapore, I had an 8 or 9 hour layover overnight. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't sleep well on airport benches. And I was also fighting off what I realize now was an untreated case of strep. So I was living the best life in Singapore overnight. So by the time I got to Taipei, I was kind of tired. So these are the sketchiest hostel instructions I've ever received. This hostel's apparently so small they don't want to give away their address for like unwelcome visitors. I'm not really sure. So they emailed me with specific instructions on how to get there, how to get to this spot, which is not the actual spot, but there's a phone right there, and it's next to a cat shop. I don't know, it's a pet store. They call it a cat shop. There's a bunch of ads for cats if anybody needs one. So I'm supposed to just call them, and they're gonna come get me and take me to the hostel. Hi, I have a reservation at Fun Hostel. I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm at the meeting point. Bye-bye. He's coming in like 10 minutes. I've already been sitting out here because I got here super early. They told me very specifically not to come before 9. So I got here at 8:30 naturally, and I've been sitting in that corner there for like 40 minutes, just chilling like a bum. It's fine. I'm disgusting. I'm still kind of sick, and I really just want to shower and go to bed. So I'm gonna wait for another 10 minutes with these cats. So, Fun Taipei, this is the name of it, Fun Taipei at Shinlin Night Market Hostel. $10 a night. They basically took a 2-bedroom apartment and turned it into a 16-bed dorm. The reason this bathroom picture is not that descriptive is because they're standing like this, trying to get the entirety of it. And I was claustrophobic in the showers. I couldn't lift my elbows up there. So it was very comfortable, but if you prefer bigger spaces, don't go to this one. Very nice, was perfect for what I needed, but definitely cramped. So Taipei, I wasn't feeling too well. So I still tried to make the most of what I could. So I kind of wandered around the city for a little bit. I went to Bopiliao Historical Block. It's an 18th century architecture. I also went to a cultural district where there was a lot of kind of craft shops and musicians strolling around. It was really cool to just kind of see local culture coming together and people from all over the world kind of gathering in parks, playing with really giant bubbles. And then I made a hike to up Elephant Mountain so that I could get a view of Taipei 101, the huge tower down there. It was rainy, pretty gray. I got lost like 3 times on a pretty predetermined path, so honestly I think that's talent on my part. But eventually I found my way, and it was a very nice view considering the weather. I also got a really cool time lapse of this snail. Oh my gosh. So it was like this big. The things you do when you travel alone. So Bopiliao Historical Block I would definitely recommend. Everyone and their aunts and uncles were taking wedding pictures there, so clearly it's a cool spot. The Huashan 1914 Creative Park, and then hiking up Elephant Mountain. I also took the gondolas up to one of the tallest points in Taipei, and that's where this view comes from. It's very touristy. They've got a bunch of food up there. The weather wasn't great, so I think it would be better during their peak season, but still very nice. So then I flew home to Shanghai, where I had Thanksgiving with my family and my mom who came to visit. So that cost was about $104 to get back home. And then about 2 weeks later, I headed out for Laos. This was the trip that both of my parents told me not to go on, because I said I want to go to Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and they said all 3 of those places are places we wouldn't recommend. But do I always do what my parents tell me to do? No. So I went to Luang Prabang. That cost was about $218, which was one of the more expensive flights that I took. This is the hostel that I stayed in, and this is the hostel right down here, and then this is the gym that they also apparently own. Same flooring and everything. Pretty cool. The beds, though, I will say, are about as comfortable as this tile floor. So I also woke up to roosters at like 4 o'clock in the morning. So a little bit of a rough sleeping situation, but a very cool place to stay. They also had an all-you-can-eat pancake breakfast, so come on. This is where I met Tamara and Robert. So Tamara, if you don't know, originally she used to work for Fox, and she was out on kind of a soul-searching journey to rediscover herself and get in touch with her healing through food. So I learned a lot about the vegan lifestyle here. And she introduced me to some really cool places to eat as well. And then Robert joined us for a day tour the following day. And both of these people really changed my life, because at this point I was starting to feel a little bit weird about going home. I had about 2.5 weeks left. And I was like, I've been living here for 6 months, I've been independent, I've had freedom, and I've kind of been on my own because the time difference, I wasn't able to stay in touch with people as much as I normally do. And I was also toying with the idea of writing a book. And thanks to all of your recommendations and reading from my blog post. And so I was sitting in a cafe one night with them. I'm sorry, it was a cocktail bar, I'm not gonna lie. I was sitting in a cocktail bar with them. and I looked at Robert and I said, I was telling him the idea about writing a book, and I said, I just don't know if I'm good enough. I'm like, Robert, will you read some of my blog posts, read some of my work, and tell me if you think that I can do this? and Tamara about lost it. She put her drink down and she looked me in the eyes and she said, "Don't you ever do that again." And I was like, I felt my heart drop into my butt. I'm like, what did I just do? She's like, "Don't ever, ever let someone tell you whether or not you're good enough for something. If you want to do it, if you're passionate about it, you do it. Don't ask for permission to live your life. Don't ask for permission for someone to tell you whether or not you're going to be good at something." Changed my life. It's the reason that I'm here now, because that extra slap in the face of reality helped motivate the entire rest of my journey and why I'm here now. So Tamara's a good one, guys. You need life advice, go to her. So Tamara and I took a day tour. She invited me to join her on her tour, and we went to a small village where we went into people's homes and they generously showed us their lifestyles, and we checked out some of the local temples and palaces. The river is actually just clay. It's not actually dirty. It's just the mud and clay. We checked out the night market naturally. It's huge. And then we also went to Guangxi Falls, which were the most beautiful falls I have ever seen in my life. So we spent a day just kind of getting to know the Luang Prabang and traveling around together. And then the following day, Robert joined us for a tour to Pakao Caves, where there's over 1,000 Buddha statues in this tiny, small cave. It's one of those staircases that you have to climb where, if you look down, you're going to get dizzy and fall anyways, even if you're not afraid of heights. This is the gas station on the river. I just thought that was kind of cool. We took a tourist boat down this river. Our boat actually broke down halfway down the river, but we just kind of floated and chatted our life away until they figured out how to fix it. At least we were going back to where we were headed and not the other direction. And then this is the view from one of the mountains that we climbed in the local area. It has a couple different temple areas on top, but it's, I guess, one of the best places to watch the sunset from the city. So definitely a climb, for sure, but certainly worth the view. So Guangxi Falls, I would definitely recommend. The river tour to Pakao Caves. Take the boat, it's the best way to see it. And then Mount Pusi, which was this view. And the temples, just any of the local temples and palaces are very rich with culture. And I would definitely recommend a tour guide so that you can understand some of the history around it, because this area wasn't necessarily, they didn't have plaques in English all over the place. So it was helpful to have a tour guide who could kind of give us some more information. And then I went to Cambodia, the last of the places that my parents wanted me to go. But I went to Siem Reap. And let me tell you about Siem Reap. It was the most white people I had seen in 6 months. It was a little alarming. And there's a whole story about that I'll either put on a blog post or in my book. But it was very jarring because you got used to being alone and being the only white person or one of few white people for miles to go. And then all of a sudden I'm in a frat house of a hostel and I don't know how to cope with myself. So this is what my house will look like. Frat house. Point in case, their draft beer was only 75 cents. So there was a lot of American music videos playing and everyone was speaking English, and it was very jarring in a way to suddenly be in a place where I could eavesdrop on conversations that I honestly didn't want to be hearing. A lot of it was let's go out and party, let's go get wasted, and it was a culture that I had so purposefully removed myself from, and then all of a sudden I was back in a place where they were talking about things that were so surface level that I no longer felt like I could relate to people from my own home country. So it was a very interesting, and I go on to explain that, especially in Gui Ren in the book, exactly what that felt like, because it took me a while to process that. Oh yeah, drug beer. But they did have a lot of great tours that came at a reasonable cost and made organizing things a little bit easier. So I did decide to go on the sunrise tour of Angkor Wat and a tour of the floating village. So this was the floating village. We took a boat through there, and then we got onto canoes and went through some of the home areas. And then we watched the sunset out on Tonle Sap. So it was very beautiful. It was a really cool environment to see. And on this tour, I actually met Nana, who is from Western Europe, and she and I started talking about the hostel because we were both staying in the same place, and I kind of started asking her, I feel kind of out of place and I don't really know why. And we had some really in-depth conversations, and it was cool because it was one of those people where you meet and you just know that you're going to understand each other. And I started talking about homesickness versus going home after having been away for so long, and kind of this dreamlike state that you can find yourself in when you're picked up from one world and quite literally placed into another. And so we got along on a lot of different levels in talking about the spirituality of travel and what it means to you and how it affects the way that you think. So there's a lot of great details about that in Gui Ren. And if you have questions, I can certainly answer any after as well. But Nana and I came across this frozen yogurt shop because I'm an ice cream fanatic, and I thought, well, frozen yogurt sounds good. And we met these students who are doing some phenomenal things in Cambodia. It's led by the Cambodia Rural Students Trust, and these kids spend their time volunteering to build houses for low-income families, to providing the necessary resources for kids to get a better education and to get the tools that they need to bring themselves out of poverty, and to also learn business practices so that they themselves can start to develop their own future. And so we created a relationship with these students, and we actually interviewed them, and there's a great video on my website about the work that they're doing and the phenomenal attitudes that they have, because these kids themselves have come out of extreme poverty and have started to develop themselves into leaders in business. And so part of the thing that I'm doing in partnership with them is selling bracelets made by local kids in Siem Reap to help support their education. So if you are interested in making a donation, certainly let me know. But these kids have been doing some phenomenal things, and I really love everything that they're doing for local low-income families in Cambodia. So there's a great video on my website if you're interested in learning more. But they've been a great asset to the story and kind of the key things that you find. This was in the middle of a night market. I never would have stumbled upon it otherwise. Sometimes when you're walking through these night markets, you think, oh, that's just another shop, and another tourist shop, another tourist restaurant. And these kids are changing lives. So we heard some wonderful stories, and it really impacted my own. So Nana and I decided to do the sunrise tour of Angkor Wat together. So we're hiking through the dark at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had, watching the sunrise up over Angkor Wat. The temples in the area are just phenomenal. You could spend a whole day there simply just walking around, but it was stunning. I have so many more pictures, but I didn't want to bog you down. We also found a couple handmade craft shops, places where people were making things right in front of you, and I think it's really important to support local artists rather than finding the tourist shop that claim that they're handmade but really they're mass produced, and you pay a high price to support artists that aren't really artists. So it's really important to me when I travel to find truly locally handmade goods, and so we found a couple really cool shops, this being one of them. And then this is actually a alcoholic jam stand, which I didn't know existed, but kind of unique. So you find some really cool things as you're walking around Siem Reap. But definitely keeping an eye out for those the truly handmade goods. We also visited the lotus farms, which lotus flowers, if you don't know, are flowers that grow in kind of murky waters. And I actually have a tattoo of one on my wrist, which happened back in college before this trip. But I personally identify with lotus flowers because I truly believe that we all have our own grime and our own murky waters that we come out of, but we learn as we grow to become something beautiful despite that. And I think that the lotus flower in itself is a very powerful message. So I thought that it was particularly cool to go to a lotus farm because I so personally identify with that plant. So we went to there. So I would definitely recommend the sunrise tour of Angkor Wat. Getting up early sucks, I know, but it's so worth it. The floating village of Tonle Sap, and then the lotus farms and locally handmade craft shops. And then I headed out to Ho Chi Minh, which is where Jenny had moved from Kuala Lumpur. So I really went to spend some time with her and explore the city. So we've got the Saigon Notre Dame, Saigon Post Office, which is actually really cool. This is City Hall. This is the view from Jenny's apartment. This is the view from the top of the Batexco Tower where we watched the sunset one night. And then I had so much coffee, I actually got sick. If you've ever had Vietnamese coffee, it is so good, but it is so potent. If you don't have food in your stomach and you're not used to it, you will get ill. But it's so good. I almost brought back a bag, but I just couldn't. And in case you're wondering, Vietnam traffic is insane, and this is only half of the picture. But if somebody did this in the States, oh my gosh, could you imagine? And hardly anyone honks because it's just normal to do that.
And we complain about it.
Yeah, we complain about our traffic and we have no idea. So the Saigon Notre Dame Basilica, the Central Post Office was a really cool experience, and the Batexco Financial Tower. I am not sponsored by Heineken. However, they did have a really cool Heineken Tour where you kind of go through what it's like to be brewed. And I got a personalized, it's on my list, bottle at the end. So that was cool in of itself. So thank you, Heineken. And then the flight from Ho Chi Minh back to Shanghai was about $227. And I flew back to Shanghai about 3 days before I flew back to the States. So all of this happened in about 5 weeks' time, not including the 2 weeks break that I took for Thanksgiving back in Shanghai. And the grand total, and granted this is total estimates, about $1,800. That includes the flight. Now that excludes food, but that includes all of the flights, accommodations, train tickets, hotel stays, and the tours themselves. So traveling through Asia is very cost effective. But it wouldn't be possible without the people that I met and the people who helped establish my goals once I landed in the country and kind of helped guide me from there. So for example, I landed in Luang Prabang having no idea what to expect or what to do. I hadn't had any tour research done. I knew where I was going to stay, but from there I pretty much planned on wandering around. And then things kind of fell into my hands as I met Tamara, as I met Robert, and we just kind of started to plan things together. And it ended up being a really fulfilling tour because of the connection and the vulnerability that I was able to make in that. Same with Siem Reap. I'd kind of dropped myself there and didn't really have a plan, and it all just kind of fell into place as I started going, yeah, that sounds kind of cool, let's just do that. And then met someone who then went on all the other adventures with me. So some people that I talk about in my upcoming book, hopefully to be finished by next summer. Chua Siu Tang is a local artist in Malaysia. He's in the style of batik. He's considered one of the fathers of batik-style painting in Malaysia. I met him, and funny enough, I walked up to, the entire story is very interesting, but the long story short of it is that I walked up and this guy was giving me a tour of the different paintings, and he was explaining to what this portrait symbolized and the balance that it symbolizes, and I thought it was really cool, but art only takes you so far if you can't really connect with it. And then he says, "This is my self-portrait." And I went, "Wait a minute, what?" And he started telling me about his own art and that this entire gallery was his. And so we talked for an hour and a half about love and passion and art and beauty in everyday life. And I created such a relationship with him that by the time I left, he wanted to give me that painting. And I couldn't take it because I knew that painting took him months to produce, and he was willing to give it to me for free, but there's just not a price tag that you can put on that kind of compassion and sharing and vulnerability and story connecting. So my goal, at some point in my life, I will buy one of his paintings, but it was like several $100,000, and I just, can't swing it right now. This is Mike and Ike. Met them both in Penang. I don't like that candy, but I thought that this was pretty comical. So I also met up with Mike. He's got his Ohio State shirt on. I met up with him again in Ho Chi Minh when he happened to be there on his second part of his journey. And then Ike was a local. He's actually from South Africa originally, but he was living in Malaysia, and so we kind of created a friendship that was very fun. And then Uncle. This guy's a really interesting read, but it's a story for another time. The long and short of it is that I had a stunning offer to be flown anywhere around the world first class, to have my student loans paid for, and to live the life that every woman wants to live. Marriage proposals are not uncommon when you are a white female traveling through Asia. There's more to that story, but you'll have to read about it. And then Chase, which is as hipster as she looks, but so totally cool and down to earth. I met her in Taipei, and she was a great sounding board for me as I was talking about going home and kind of the stresses that I was dealing with. And one of those friends who kind of comes out of nowhere and offers just the support that you need in the time that you need it most. Also really loves pour over coffee. And then Faye and Yok, I met them in Thailand, which is a different segment of the trip. But they continue to send me selfies. This is 2 of them. Can't speak hardly any English, but they took really good care of me one night and was there for me when I shipped the toenail polish on my nail, and they sat there and they covered all my bug bites with what's called Tiger Balm, the best itch relief in Asia. And they just wanted to be my friend, and I sat outside of their salon with them for probably 45 minutes, couldn't understand a single word they said, but they were all laughing and having a great time. I couldn't leave. So now they send me selfies, and they tell me about their boy problems, even though I can't really understand or help. So all of these stories are a part of Gui Ren. And Gui Ren, in case you don't know, is a written Chinese phrase that encompasses the right people coming into your life with synchronicity to help you overcome a challenge. And all of the people that I met in Asia through my journey through Western China, through just being alone in Shanghai, and then throughout the entirety of Southeast Asia, they impacted my journey because they helped me through something, whether I knew it or not, that I needed it. And so all of these individuals helped form the person that stands before you today. And the only way that I could think of to thank them from the bottom of my heart would be to share their stories with you and to share the stories that they helped me to create. And so that's what Gui Ren is. It's the extraordinary stories of ordinary people that come into your life to help create the person that you are and create the journey that you're on. And so, like I said, working on the book, 60% of the way there, hopefully coming to you next summer. But I've got tons of extra footage and video and photos that I have yet to post. So if you're interested in following along on the journey, that would be an honor. I do have another storytelling session coming up this Saturday at Telebration. It's going to be at the Ohio History Center. It's $5 to get in, and it's going to have a lot of music and female storytellers. It's got an all-female cast this year. So if you would like to hear more about the story of Zaman and our adventure and our kind of precarious friendship, I would love to see you there at that. It's this Saturday at 7. And otherwise, this is all of my information if you'd like to kind of follow along on the journey. I'm hoping to have a continued lecture series or several individual presentations next year as I kind of get started on that. But I'm currently working on raising the funds to help edit the book once I'm finished with it and continue producing the stories that changed my life and can help change yours. So like I said, the entire premise of Gui Ren is enabling yourself to have those maybe minute connections and connections that may or may not last your whole lifetime but can still leave a lasting impact. I like to give the example of I was at the gas station one time pumping gas, and I had barely spent time getting ready in the morning, and a woman came around the corner and she said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be weird, but I just have to tell you, your hair is gorgeous. And I was like, thank you. I didn't do anything to it. But that made my day, and it turned the whole thing around. And there's this piece of kindness that we all have inside of us. And sometimes we tend to suppress it because we've got other stuff going on in our lives, or we don't know other people that are around us. But the more that we let it out and the more that we create those small connections with people, the more stories like this start to happen. Whether it's at home or whether it's overseas, these are the connections that you live the rest of your life with, that you live knowing that you've impacted a life and that someone else has impacted yours. So join me on the journey of Gui Ren. Help me to live a life that's authentic and meaningful in kindness and connection and authenticity. And thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. You guys have any questions? I threw a lot at you. Yes?
I'm just curious because you ended up going to Shanghai or wherever to start your trip, not knowing you were going to end up in Cambodia, Laos, and those other countries in that humid weather. What about malaria medication or anything like that? Were you prepared for that?
I did have some. I was prepared. My mother is a nurse, so she would not let me go to Asia without all of my shots and every single potential medication that I might need. The irony is that I was stocked with antibiotics, but when I got sick, I had no idea what I had, so I didn't take anything, thinking it's a common cold, it'll go away. But I actually had a whole first aid kit with everything that I needed to cure myself. So I was prepared to that extent. I did have some medications with me that would help. The clothing was a different story, but yes.
I'll give a message from the audience. Did you have a moment where you were afraid, and how did you get past it?
I was afraid every second of this trip. I mean, I'm afraid living my life here. And I actually just wrote a blog post about fear and how there's a fine line between being afraid of something because you're not sure of the outcome and being afraid of something because it could harm you. And I realized as I was traveling that it was that first one. It was the fear of not knowing the outcome. But I truly believe that trusting in your ability to overcome that fear is a love of yourself. I was afraid to go on that adventure with Simon because it was a local man. I had no idea who he was, what his family was like. Got onto the back of a motorbike with him and thought, but my gut never told me that it was wrong. And I know that sounds so corny to trust your gut, but we don't trust our guts enough. There are so many decisions that I've made lately in my life that if I really sit down and look at it, I go, why am I doing this? And in the long run, I think this is what's meant to happen. I'm trusting myself to make this work. I was about ready to throw myself off the back of that bike at one point because he turned left and I thought we were going to go straight. But I knew in that moment that I could handle it because I trust myself and how fast I can run. That was about it. But traveling as a single female always presents its fears. And I'm not ignorant. I know that there are things that happen around the world. But knowing to keep a look over my shoulder, knowing to keep my personal belongings close to me, and just trusting that I was going to be okay, whatever happened. I didn't go into any sketchy places. I didn't purposefully put myself in a situation that I thought, this might not end well. But if I had listened to all of those fears, I never would have left the United States. I had a fear of moving to Shanghai in the first place. My grandmother wasn't doing well. What if she passed and I wasn't there? What if something happened to my family and I couldn't just hop on a flight and go home? That fear is a fear that's always within me. But if I hold myself back and don't live my life because I'm afraid of one thing that could happen and all of the what ifs that float around our chaotic brains, I wouldn't be living the life that I am. And I wouldn't be living a life that's authentic to what I'm passionate about. So I think fear protects us in so many ways. But fear is also something that you can learn to love about yourself and overcome to become stronger and more independent and full of love. Any other questions? We got 10 more minutes, guys. Questions? Well, if you think of any, yes.
It's not a question, but it's a compliment. You are a wise young woman.
Thank you.
Experiences that you've had will take you through the rest of your life in ways that you may never have known had you not done this.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you so much for being a part of this again. I'd love for you to help follow along and stay in touch as I start to do other presentations, hopefully in the spring, and continue to publish the book. So I will, if you'd like to put your email on the list back there, I will be sending out updates. Don't worry, I won't spam you. But I will be sending out updates of how Goy Run is coming along. And of course, as soon as it's out on Amazon, I will let you know. So feel free to put your email down. If you would like to support the Cambodia Rural School Trust, just let me know. Otherwise, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing this with me. And have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you.